Welcome back. We're talking to Oliver Stone and Peter Kuznick, the co-authors of the book, The Untold History of the United States, and of the acclaimed television series of the same name. Welcome to both of you back to the show. Oliver, let me ask you about more recent history. The 9/11 attacks, devastating attacks on the United States. How did it change this country?
Well, it really did. I mean, it was a symbolic event in the sense that almost equal to the French Revolution in its shock to the consciousness, as if, I don't know why, we had never been invaded, we never felt that we were at a war, we were never attacked so deeply, except at Pearl Harbor, which was overseas, you remember, at that time. It wasn't even a state, it was a base. Here we were at New York City, so I think it was a traumatic event for most Americans. Having been to war, I have to say, I felt at the time the reaction was hysterical and panicked. And I thought that the desire for revenge was blind. I know it's obvious now, but people still don't accept it in the United States. They don't understand that Iraq had nothing to do with the attacks. They think it was all some Middle Eastern thing. And on the other hand, the real culprits, in a sense, were Saudi Arabia. That's where they came from, and there was a lot of financing. A lot of the report on 9/11 was redacted, and it was about the Saudi Arabian financing. So it's very bothersome. So the blame is on little old Afghanistan, which for centuries has been the backwater of the world, and of course, in a sense, the swamp of the world, where the English get stuck, and many people have met their fate in Afghanistan, including the Russians, by the way, the Soviet Empire. So here we go.
And the British.
We took every wrong path after 9/11, under the worst president we probably ever had. He's worse than Harry Truman. I would say Harry Truman made similar type mistakes, gigantic consequences, but certainly Bush compounded the errors, and we have never recovered. And Mr. Obama, I know you're going to ask me about him. We had great hopes that 2008 was going to be a change, but he fell under the hypnotism of this mentality that you cannot give up electoral votes. You cannot lose an election by promising more security to the American people. You cannot lose.
Okay, I want to come to President Obama in a moment, but Peter, let me get your take on that and how the country changed after 9/11. Because if we look at the country right now, it's become a surveillance state.
Yeah, we became paranoid.
Right.
We were scared. We got so scared by that event that it changed our thinking. On the one hand, became jingoistic, God bless America, America first everywhere again, and even more strongly than it had been before. Then we start lashing out blindly. The Afghanistan approach was wrong. In many ways, the Taliban were sending us signals that they would that they would hand Osama bin Laden over to us. We could have avoided that whole decade of searching for him and all of the wreckage and bloodshed that went on there. But then we became so paranoid, and we start surveilling ourselves. When countries become paranoid, they start taking away, they give up their civil liberties. It's like the South after 1831, after the Nat Turner Rebellion. They become so obsessed with slave rebellions that they give away their own freedoms. They censor their mail, they drive people out, they stifle opposition. Same thing happened in the United States at that point. So we start surveilling ourselves, we give away our civil liberties, we crack down in all these ways that hadn't been the case before. We get rid of information that had been public before, now we're taking it off the internet. And this is not the way a democracy certainly is supposed to act. And we've become less and less of a democracy over that time also. If you look at our elections since 2011, they've been more bought up by big money, smaller and smaller, narrower interests, trying to keep African Americans and others who might pose a threat off the ballot in many states. So as a country, we've gone so far backward since 2001.
Let's get back to Barack Obama. You mentioned him just a moment ago. Here we have this president coming in 2008. The big banner was hope and change. Everybody thought this was America taking a turn right now after George Bush. Yet not only did he keep many of George Bush's policies, he doubled down on them.
Yeah. This is the way of the new world. This is America now. This is an extremely paranoid state, too scared for its own good. And you cannot lose elections by promising more security. People have to grow up. They have to accept that death is a part of life, and this is part of a philosophy of. We live so, in a way, we're too fat for our own good. We've lived a good life. The consumerism of television and so many years of having gasoline cheaply, and it's given us a sense of softness and a sense of entitlement. And as a result, money buys everything. Money can buy you safety. It can buy you, in a sense, immortality. And there's no such thing. There is a reckoning with history.
Right, and if we look at the bigger picture here, and if we don't take these wars as just episodic events, I mean, Andrew Besovich of Columbia University actually wrote a piece in which he said that Syria, which has just been bombed by the United States, is the 14th country in the Islamic world that has been either invaded or bombed by the United States.
Well, it's foreigners who often see this. Some Americans see it and they write about it, but we don't have the power. And the congressmen seem to be gridlocked. They seem to be enthralled to the electorate. The electorate seems to operate off the hysteria of the media. The media, of course, builds up every single terror event into something to get ratings points. So there's a strange cycle that goes, self-fulfilling cycle, where we end up hiking our security to a new levels each time. The cost of this, of course, is amazing. We've had at least $50 billion in this new security homeland thing. The concept of homeland, the use of that word, the whole Orwellian use of language in America. It's no fun. And the surveillance state is deeply bothersome to everybody that should be thinking about this. But most people don't even think about it because they got their television, they got their games, they got their gladiator games and so forth. And people don't really reckon the bargain. It's going to come around one day. It's not going to go on like this. I mean, there will be some dues to pay.
But even on that point, one other country goes around bombing 14 other countries. And the United States has bombed far more than 14 other countries since World War II.
Those are just Islamic countries.
Yeah, right. Only the United States behaves that way. Does China go around bombing other countries? How would we feel if China started to bomb Syria or Russia started to bomb Syria? Nobody else does these things. I like to quote Samuel Huntington, partly because I don't agree with him on almost anything. But one thing he said that I agree with, he said the West won the world not by the superiority of its ideas or values or religion, but by the superior application of organized violence. Westerners often forget that fact. Non-Westerners never do. So again, perception. That's why when we talk about leaders who we really respect, like Henry Wallace or Franklin Roosevelt or John Kennedy, they had the ability to see the way the world looked through the eyes of their enemies or opponents or antagonists. But you look at the American leaders since then. George Bush is the prime example, but other people are almost as guilty. And this narrow, myopic, American-first perspective does not allow them to behave in the ways in the world that the United States should be behaving.
Right, but there is something else, Oliver, you mentioned that, and that is, why are Americans so complacent? Here we are in a situation today where we have our telephones are tapped, our email is read, people are monitored, our entire history is on a hard drive somewhere, our health condition is known to the entire country. We get strip search at the airports. We get strip search. They are so complacent, they seem to accept that.
Yes, well, that's a society, that is a sense of totalitarianism. If you open your mouth about the next guy being strip searched at the airport, you might be called in yourself. So there's conformity, the rule of conformity in school. It goes back to high school and grade school. I remember the desire not to ruffle the waves. That's why a guy like Ed Snowden stands out. A lot of people agree with what he was doing at the NSA, but when he did it, he was alone.
But if you look at some of these things, torture, imprisonment without trial, you can be put on the no-fly list if you challenge the government, and you can challenge that in court. These are the bedrock, democratic.
Yeah, the Espionage Act undercuts that enormously. You're not even allowed to bring up the charges. You're not allowed to discuss the charges against you.
What is your next project?
My next project is the Ed Snowden story, which we're trying to put up for next year.
That's where we have to leave it. Oliver Stone.
Thank you very much, Anand.
Thank you very much for joining us. And that's it for this edition of The Heat. Thanks for being with us. I'm Anand Naidoo in Washington, D.C.